What's up and welcome to what feels like a brand new garage. Now it's not a new garage, obviously it's the same old one, but we did a ton of work to this thing to get it ready for this next build. There's still some work that needs to be done. I've been doing some off camera. I built a welding table back here, did some painting, got a few more things that we need to do just to make this place more efficient, but I can finally start the new build and I'm so excited to show it to you guys. Are you ready? Let's go look at it. This is my 1974 MGB GT. So I did say it's an MGB GT. It's a Grand Tourer, which makes it a little bit more special than the regular MGB. But you might be wondering, why have I never seen one of these? What is this car? I've never even heard of this thing. And so for that, we're going to take a quick trip down memory lane. Well, somebody else's memory because I didn't live in the 50s. Fixed roof MGB GT is the less known counterpart to the MGB Roadster. It went into production in October of 1965 and that continued until 1980, though US stopped receiving models in 1974. The MGB GT sported a groundbreaking greenhouse designed by Pininfarina, and it launched the sporty hatchback style. This new configuration was a 2+2 design with a right-angled rear bench seat and far more luggage space than the Roadster counterpart. Very few components differed, although the MGB GT did receive different suspension springs, anti-roll bars, and a different windscreen, which was easily and inexpensively serviceable. In 2019, Road & Track named the GT one of 16 of Pininfarina's most beautiful designs that are not Ferraris. Although acceleration of the GT was slightly slower than that of the Roadster, owing to its increased weight, top speed improved by 5 miles per hour to 105 miles per hour because of better aerodynamics. All MGBs, except for the V8 version, use the BMC-B series engine. It's essentially an enlarged version of the MGA engine, moving displacement from 1622 cc's all the way up to 1798. Horsepower was rated at 96 net bhp on both the 5 main bearing and 3 bearing cars, with peak power coming in at 5400 RPM and a redline of 6000. Torque output on the MGB had a peak of 110 pound-feet, and fuel consumption was around 25 miles per gallon. The MGB was a groundbreaking car in both design and performance, which is why we have one on the channel, but we also bought this one because it was cheap. For you guys that don't know, Pininfarina is a design house that has designed a lot of legendary Ferraris. A lot of really, really great designs that you know and love were designed by Pininfarina. And so at one point in my life, I started searching around and seeing what cars were designed by them that weren't Ferraris. And this is one of them. So the original design is a Roadster. That's probably what you're used to seeing. It has no top. And something that they did with this car that was really revolutionary for the time was creating this kind of hatchback style. Now, I think this car was designed in the 60s, maybe even in the late 50s. And so this was not a common shape at all for an automobile. Now we're used to seeing this kind of thing. And the Z3 Coupe actually replicated this as well. But at the time, it was really, really forward thinking. It was very different. It was very unique. And that's one of the things that makes this car so special. Now, they also added a back seat with the GT model. It's kind of a bench seat that sits right behind the driver's seat. It's just an L shape, basically. They put padding on it and called it a seat right on top of the battery. And I'm not sure how useful that is. You could probably throw some kids in there, but I think we may be getting rid of that. This specific example came with a 4-cylinder inline 4, obviously, and it's got a dual carb setup. I don't know much about these carbs. They are very different from any carb I've ever seen, very common on the MG, and evidently they're really hard to break. I guess they're very reliable. I started looking up rebuild kits, super expensive, by the way, but I was looking into it and a lot of people were saying, look, don't rebuild the whole thing, just replace the parts that you think you need. These things just want to work. And that's great because most of the time in American carburetors, for example, you just rebuild it, but the kit's like $30. This engine does run mostly, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Overall, this car is really great. Now, there's a few special things about this car. One is the color, which I'm told is called Blaze Orange. And the other is that it's a 1974. Now, why that's special? Well, these things stopped being imported into the US in 1974. So this is the absolute latest US model that you can get, and that makes it a little bit rare. They're kind of hard to find in general. Now, there were two major design options for this car. There was a metal steel bumper or chrome bumper, front and rear, and then there were the rubber bumper versions. The rubber bumper are the later versions, and the chrome bumper were the earlier versions. The chrome bumpers look better, like most of the time. Chrome bumpers just look better, but I do like what they did with these rubber bumpers. We'll probably be getting rid of these, so if you need some, let me know. We'll be doing a little bit of a different style, but this is a rubber bumper car, in case you were wondering, and this is not plastic. It's a weird kind of malleable rubber. Very weird, but it works. Something that you will hear very often about MGBs is that they rot, and for good reason. These things do rot very easily, and when I said I mean rust, they can get rust everywhere. Now, there's a few things that can save them. One is living in a dry climate, so if you're out west, further south, kind of Arizona type area, or really even anywhere out west, where you don't have a lot of humidity, it can actually save the car because the rust won't continue to grow. In the south, we have a pretty good climate for rust. We don't have salt on our roads, we don't get snow, so that helps a lot, but we do have 100% humidity basically all the time. So we are gonna have some rust issues there. Now, this is a southern car. From what I understand, it has lived its whole life in Georgia until now, and it's pretty good. Now, this rocker sounds like metal, which is great. This is a structural part of the design. This car was actually one of the first to have kind of a unibody style structure, like what you would see in newer cars. A lot of cars at the time had body on frame, and so that's one of the reasons why you see such a lowered ride height, is this thing is not sitting on a frame, the body is the frame, just like any sort of modern car. In the 50s, late 50s, early 60s, this was very modern, very state-of-the-art, cutting edge, and it allowed it to reach a top speed of 105 miles per hour. So we will be probably replacing definitely the other rocker, maybe this one. That's definitely metal, but right here, sounds like there may be some Bondo or something there. We want to make sure that's super strong, so we may end up, we'll definitely end up cutting that down and just seeing what's going on underneath. Speaking of rust, underneath this very, very cool deck lid, we have parts. I have so many parts for this car. They're mostly in boxes, but these were in the car. Pieces of our back seat that has been professionally recovered. Some carpet, speakers, and then here you're gonna lift up the, whatever this is called, deck lid cover, and you can see one of my first problems. So, as I said earlier, this car doesn't run. Well, okay, it runs, but it doesn't drive or run for a very long time, and here's the reason: it didn't have gas in it. So we put some gas in it, and it instantly started leaking through the bottom. Thank you, Ty, for helping me figure that out. And the gas was leaking straight out of the gas tank, so we're gonna have to solve that. Now, the first obvious solution was, well, replace the gas tank. But I don't know if you can see, surely you can listen. That used to be metal, and now it's not. Evidently, we have a leak in this deck lid, or maybe it was left open for some time. I'm not really sure. Either way, this whole section has almost all the way rusted out. So we're gonna have to cut that out. We're gonna have to put new metal in, and we're gonna be solving our fuel system issue as well with a really exciting solution that we may get to in this video. I don't know, we'll see. Now, another thing that's pretty cool about this car is the tag. The tag on the car is a Georgia tag. I actually grew up in Georgia, fun fact. Lawrenceville, if any of you guys are in Lawrenceville or that area. That's where I grew up. And I had one of these tags on my car. I was born in 1991, and this tag says 1993. 1993. Now, I am under the assumption and honestly belief that that is the last time this car was registered and was driven regularly. A little bit of backstory on this specific MGB is it was bought by a guy's granddad. His granddad passed away and left it to him. He had it in his garage for a long time, had a slave solenoid issue with it, and could not drive it. It sat and sat, and then his neighbor bought it from him, and then it sat at his neighbor's house for 8 years, and then I bought it from his neighbor. Now, when I bought this car, I was told it was a running car. I kind of made the assumption that it drove and had been driven recently.
It has not. So we will be getting this thing back on the road. And this is a problem that I have, and I think a lot of car guys have. I saw this car and I probably shouldn't have bought it. And the reason I say that is if I wanted to do an MGB GT, I could have paid a decent amount more, but I could have gotten a lot better example. But my problem is I see a car like this, and it's a great car, it's a unique car, they're hard to find, they're beautiful cars, they're a driver's car, this car deserves to be on the road and driven. And I find them in parking lots or driveways, and they've been sitting, man, what year is it? Let's see, 27 years without driving, probably. And I feel sad for them, and I have to fix them. I don't know why, it's just, it's a problem that I have. But so far I've had pretty good luck with it. The Corolla was kind of in the same boat, though it did drive. It was just very neglected, and this thing is in that boat as well. And so I am excited to get it back on the road, get it running again, and give this car a new life, a very new and different looking life than it's ever had. So we'll probably save this tag, I don't know, we'll see. Let's go to the interior, it's gross. So you can see I have a cable running in here, right down here. That's for the battery. I'm charging it so that we can try to start this thing. I'm gonna go to the other side. So the interior of this car, it's bad. The seats are very bad. They're not salvageable at all. You can get seat covers for these, but the foam is falling apart. It's really gross and nasty. I don't know if we'll try to find some MG seats to put in here, because I do like the way they look. But we may just go with some sort of universal setup. I'm not sure. The headliner actually is really nice. I think it's very nice, which I appreciate after the last car. And everything kind of overhead is really good. Everything down here, not so much. The dash obviously has got holes and cracks and all kinds of stuff in it. We're gonna see if we can find a dash cover for this. And then the floors, honestly, are decent, but there's definitely some rust repair we're gonna have to do. Not a big deal. I learned how to do that with the last car, so we should be okay there. The dash and everything actually looks okay, but we really won't know until we really get to use this thing. Like I said, I've never driven this car. I've heard it run, and that is it. So I don't know what the transmission does. It'll shift into gears, which is good, I guess, but we're not gonna know until this thing is moving on its own power. So assuming we can get it working again, this thing's gonna be sick. Now, the back seat, like I said, is gonna go, but it's back there. It's also gross. And overall, I'm just gonna try to get rid of everything that I can get rid of to kind of ungross this gross, nasty, smelly car. All right, let's get out of here. Now, like I said earlier, the wheels on this car, they're actually really, really sick. They are Z wheels. I think it's a 280Z. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But I really love the design. I think it fits this car really well. It fits the brakes really well. And I would love to be able to use this, but it's not gonna work for our setup. It's obviously gotta be wider. So the idea I had would be to cut this wheel out and do like a OEM 3-piece conversion. That's a lot of stuff. I've been seeing a lot of that recently. But the wait time on that kind of thing and the price on that is just too high for us. It's gonna take too long. So I have a set of wheels that I'm gonna throw on this thing, and we're gonna use them to kind of build everything out. I doubt I will keep them on the car because I think this is gonna need a multi-piece wheel at some point. Just because of the width we're gonna be giving it. I don't really wanna throw a spacer on for a long time, if that makes sense. I'll do it to build the car out and get our wheel specs figured out. But eventually we're gonna be wanting to do some sort of multi-piece. So if you know somebody that will convert wheels to a multi-piece, let me know in the comments below, because I would love to have these on this car, and you know, but a little bit bigger and a little bit wider. So what are we gonna be doing to this car? Well, I'm not gonna tell you everything, but I will tell you that it's gonna be made much, much wider, much wider. Now, I don't feel bad about cutting this car up because this car has been sitting for 20 years and it deserves a new life, and I'm gonna give it that. But it's gonna be a different life. It's gonna be a wider life. It's gonna be a built life. So that is what we're gonna be doing with it. We're also going to be redoing the whole interior in something that we haven't done before, in a style we haven't done before. We're gonna be getting it running and getting it working properly, kind of the same way we did the Corolla. I'm gonna get everything to function well together, and then we're gonna discuss maybe engine swaps or power adders. I think the engine swap is probably the best idea for this car. threw it out there kind of to the members, and they said that it needs an inline 6, and I agree. There's a lot of space under there for an i6 or a V8. You just can't go wrong with a V8 as far as cheapness goes for power to cheapness ratio. But i6, turbo i6 would be very cool. But before we get into that, I just need to make sure this thing will function and work as a driving car, and that there's not too much damage to drive it. And I don't think there is based on what I've seen, but as we get into it, we're gonna really find out the history and the story of this car. So the first thing we have to do on this car is get it running. We're gonna work on that today in this first video, and then we'll start making it look really cool and be really awesome. So like I said, the fuel system does not work, and it's not producing fuel, like it's not getting fuel to the engine. So we're gonna bypass that and get fuel to the engine with our standalone system, which I'll show you in a minute. It's very sick. Me and Chase built it for another car that we got running. And we're gonna use that to kind of try to test this car out, test the engine out, and maybe drive it if we're insanely lucky. This car doesn't have brakes, but it does have an e-brake that works. So we could drive it with the e-brake. I don't have my hopes up, but I do have my hopes up for getting it running. Wish me luck, we're gonna need it. All right, so you are looking at our standalone fuel system. Now, Chase and I built this almost a year ago now. We bought a car that would not run. It was a topless van G10 or I think it's called a G10 van. It's a chop top convertible G10 van that we bought, that we did on the channel then, but we didn't really have the audience for it. So if you guys want to see that, let me know in the comments below. We want to wide body it. But we built this standalone fuel system for it just to see if we could get it to drive down the road, which we did. It was super sketchy, but it worked. And so what I'm gonna do is bypass all of the MG's factory fuel stuff and use all of my own, which is all brand new. So what this does, this tells me, okay, is the only problem that we have, the only running problem we have fuel? If so, cool, we'll just put a new fuel system in and we will be on our way. But this bypasses all that factory stuff. And I really hate running these clamps in. I should mention the last time we used this ended in a giant plume of smoke coming out of the motor, but that was actually more due to a fire extinguisher issue than this, so we should be all right. All right, so I just filled up this gas tank, 1 gallon of gas. Should idle us for a while. Now there's two factors at play here. The first is obviously the gas issue. The second is my battery's dead. Well, it was. I plugged it up yesterday and let it charge. It's still not fully charged, but hopefully it's enough to crank the car. I don't know, we're about to find out. The starter on this car, proportionally speaking, is insanely huge, so it takes a lot of power to turn. All right, good. So we can crank at least a couple times. Now, the clicking sound that you were hearing, that's part of the fuel system, so it's gonna get replaced. If you have an MG hood that you're willing to part with for less than like, you know, $400 or $500, what everybody's been quoting me, let me know. Or if you know where I could find a fiberglass one, I would actually rather have a fiberglass one. The stock hood's aluminum, and that means for me it's hard to work on. I don't know how to TIG weld yet. Hopefully that doesn't fall on my head. All right, so we need some tools. All right, so I disconnected the fuel inlet here. We're gonna throw in our gas tank. So now we have virtually, I mean not virtually, literally bypassed the entire fuel system. That should let us know if that's where our problem is. Now I did have fuel in this line, so it seems like the pump was working, but the tank's not holding enough gas to actually get the car to run. So that's good news, which means that likely all of our hardline stuff is good, which if we can reuse that, that'll save us some time. Okay, now I'm gonna run this over here. All right, so I made a quick little wiring harness to wire this fuel pump in, and basically we got our power here. I ran out of wire, so my red wire is gonna be my ground, and my green wire is gonna be my hot. And then in that, we have just a single pole on-off switch, and then a spade that is going to stick into our battery. On the other side of this ground, we have a spade as well that will stick into the ground side. So we're gonna do that first, and hopefully the fuel pump's in the off position. We'll find out. All right, so I have everything set up now. Everything's wired in. I have a switch to turn the fuel pump on. The fuel pump is primed. Tried to start the car and it did not run. Now that's kind of normal with old carbureted cars. A lot of times they sat for a while. You have to spray some starter fluid in there just to kind of jump them back into life. So I'm gonna shoot some of this in there, and hopefully we can get it to start. I should tell you, this thing has no headers, so it's really loud. All right, so it runs. I mean, okay, so good and bad. Here's the good and the bad. Let's just go over pro and con real quick. Okay, so the car does run. That was good. The only problem is it's held at open throttle because the throttle link is just like super sticky. The carbs are just staying open like almost all the way, which is why it just revved to the moon. So I'm gonna fiddle with that for a little bit and see if I can get it to kind of open and close on its own. Maybe some brake clean will do that. And then I think we can get it to run, because it did. That's the longest it stayed running so far, and I think it would have kept going if I hadn't shut it off. So let's do a little fiddling. I'll be back. This is attempt number 2. Fuel pump on. And it intakes and exhausts on the same side. That is odd, all right? That's why it's so loud right over here. Oh, yeah, and sure enough, there is nothing connected down there. That is wide open. So what we're hearing is just the open header, basically. And this engine is way louder than the Corolla. Like open headers, way louder. All right, so what I'm looking at is this carburetor opens, this one doesn't. I think this is a secondary, like if you're flooring it, I think. There's a little thing that actuates it up here. So anyway, I've got to get it to not go wide open. I really want to idle this engine, try to get it up to temperature and just see if it'll hold a temp or if it's going to overheat, see where we need to go from there. Yeah, I think that's going to be the running problem. And if we can solve this, then we're going to be moving in the right direction. All right, so I think I may have sorted the problem out, but either way, I'm gonna show you what's happening. So these are your 2 carbs. I don't know what is going on here. I think they're called STU carbs or something like that. But this looks like nothing I've ever seen before. As far as I can tell, they're only used on MGs. Who knows? They do look cool. But there is like a diaphragm right here, this metal thing with the line, the groove into it. It opens up to let air in. So when you push down the gas, it turns this little contraption. Mine doesn't work very well right now. And that lets air, lets fuel in, makes boom. And then I assume that this is a secondary where when you go full out all the way to the floor, the entire second carb opens, which is kind of insane. For example, the carburetor on my Corolla, the Weber, just has 2 ports. One port opens most of the time, and then when you floor it, the second port opens. Now, a lot of people do convert these to a Weber carb. It's a pretty expensive conversion. I think if we were gonna throw a bunch of money at this, which we may, it'll just be a different engine. But for now, we're gonna run with this one. All right, so it's still really loud, but this is way more tolerable. You'll notice the engine is shaking really bad like this. I've got new engine mounts to fix that problem. I just assumed it was gonna need it. They're solid rubber, and mounts go bad. Overall though, it sounds pretty good. Now I can't really rev it because it's so sticky, the throttle cable's so sticky that it just wide opens and won't shut. I'm gonna let it idle and see if it'll get to temperature and hold there. So one major design flaw with this garage is that a lot of the cars I buy are broken and don't run, and there is a giant hill. Well, it doesn't feel that giant until you have to push something very heavy and flat tired up it. So we're gonna push another car into the garage and hopefully we make it. This one does not roll as easy as the Corolla did.
You can see this is just totally rotted out. That's the worst corner. The rest of the floor has a good bit of rot too, but that is really bad. So that'll definitely have to get replaced. We'll peel some of this rust back and see how far it actually goes, and then decide kind of how we want to repair it.
Often, this is how the octagon spirit makes itself felt on this otherwise humdrum planet. MGB, latest of the breed, latest example of the octagon spirit. MGB, a high-performance vehicle, America's largest selling imported sports car. Competition-proved engine turns up speed in excess of 105 miles per hour. Creature comforts too, snug roll-up windows and draft-free top. The safety of big, fade-free disc brakes. Oft-times, the octagon spirit seizes pedestrians as well. Then you find yourself surrounded by ardent admirers. Get the octagon spirit. Removable hardtop or soft-top convertible. Get an MGB.